Hello, and welcome back to another episode of It's Fine. So, I am 24, so I'm in like my early to mid 20s. And me and my friends talk about the fact that your 20s is such a beautifully weird time in your life because it feels like so many people are at so many different stages of their lives at this age range at whenever you're in your 20s, it feels like people are living their lives in such different but yet valid ways. So, for example, one of my friends is married with a house and two kids. One of my friends just recently bought a house with her husband. Another friend is currently living with her boyfriend and she's trying to figure out the next steps of her career. My one friend just recently graduated college and she's about to start a new job and she's planning on moving to a new city. And like me, I've been living on my own for the last year and a half, and I'm single, and I've been largely focusing on my career. Currently, over the last year or so, I've been really focusing on my career, my hobbies, and trying to make the most of my time and spend time with my friends and my family. Like I said, I feel like your 20s is a beautiful time in your life, but I kind of have to argue that I feel like a lot of people romanticize their 20s way too much. And I'll explain what I mean when I say that. So, first, I want to define what it means to romanticize something. So, according to Oxford Languages, to romanticize something is to deal with or describe in an idealized or unrealistic fashion, to make something seem better or more appealing than it really is. Now, I know some people argue that you should romanticize your whole life. And when they say this, they mean that you should find joy or appreciation of the small, mundane aspects of life. I'm in full support of the idea that you should romanticize your life. I do this because I love the idea of finding beauty in the small aspects of life because a large majority of your life is filled with small moments. So why would you not be grateful for those small moments and find the beauty in them? And I feel like doing that allows you to live a more meaningful life. But what I'm not in support of is just romanticizing your 20s. Acting as if your 20s are the best years of your life or glorifying them in some weird way. And I don't really care if people romanticize their own 20s. That only really affects them. If they want to do that, be my guest. But what I don't love is the fact that it seems like this idea is pushed on to young people. Recently, especially, I've heard so many people, especially on the internet, try to claim that your 20s universally is the best years of your life. However, I feel like trying to claim that not only puts way too much pressure on young people, but it also is just kind of downright false a lot of the time. For example, according to a YouGov survey of 13,000 Americans, they found that 24% do believe that your 20s represent the best years of your life. But roughly about a quarter of people believe that their 30s are actually the best years. It also found that a lot of people just tend to say the decade that they're currently living in despite their age, which is very interesting. Now, The Atlantic published an article called "The One Size Fits All Narrative of Your 20s Needs to Change." And in this article, it said, quote, "Many people roll their 20s through a sugarcoating of nostalgia, but framing young adulthood as the best time of life is a little grim as it puts a limit on growth. This glorification of youth also seems to assume that everyone has the same resources, moves on the same timeline in the same way, and has the same kind of life, one filled with adventure and experimentation." Which I feel like that quote alone summarizes perfectly my problems with the idea of trying to say that everyone's 20s should be the best years of their life. Because it's sort of a little grim about the rest of your life. Whenever people tell me, oh, your 20s are the best years of your life, I'm sitting there thinking, what, is it all downhill from here? Is this really the peak? And then it's just going to go straight downhill from there and just get worse after that, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, as people get older, they sort of reframe how they look at their 20s. And they think that their 20s were the best years of their lives, whether they actually objectively were or were not. So, today, I actually finished reading the book called The Age of Magical Overthinking Notes on Modern Irrationality by Amanda Montell, which I do have to say, this book is absolutely phenomenal. I enjoyed reading it so much, and I feel like this book is a great read, especially with us living in the digital age, because it talks about various different biases that you could have that could affect the way that you view the world and you view what you see online, especially with the rise of social media. So 10 out of 10 would recommend this book. But in the book, she talks about the concept of declinism, which she writes is the false impression that things are worse now than they were in the past, and it's all downhill from here. She also discusses the fading effect bias, which basically says that, with the exception of traumatic events, cognitive psychology research shows that memories of negative emotions dwindle quicker than positive ones. Not to mention, in one of my previous episodes, What Makes a Person, I brought up the point that our memory is extremely faulty, which could contribute to this glorification of the past. Because if we are predispositioned to believe that we are worse off currently than we were in the past, and we also tend to let go of negative emotions from the past quicker than we do positive ones, and our memory is faulty, I feel like it is so easy to beautifully decorate the past with positivity in our minds, whether or not it was actually the best time in our lives. It also makes me wonder if people just claim that their 20s were the best years of their lives because they had less responsibility back then, or because they regret where their decisions have led them to the current point in their lives. And they see their 20s as a better time in their lives because they had less responsibility and they felt like they had more options for their lives at that point. I mean, I have even asked people, what do you feel like the best time of your life was? And a lot of people that I've talked to either say their 20s or they say their early teen years, like whenever they were in like high school. And usually I ask why they say that, and a lot of times people say the reasoning for this is because they had less responsibility. I mean, that's usually what it boils down to, is the fact that they were just going to school and that's all they really had to focus or stress about, that they got to spend so much time with their friends and they didn't have to worry about basically adulting. Like, they didn't have to worry about the responsibility of being an adult, like paying bills, having a family, all of that type of stuff. Which I do have to say, I find it so interesting that so many people feel like they're worse off now than they were in the past, largely due to responsibility, in which a lot of that responsibility was their own choosing, if that makes sense. Which is why I say maybe a lot of people regret their decisions and regret where their decisions have led them to this point. You know, because if they're going to complain about all this responsibility of adulting, a lot of that you put onto yourself when it comes to like debt that you have to pay off. Now, to sit here and try to say that like your 20s is always going to be the best years of your life, I don't think it's fair, because some people may not like their 20s based on their circumstances, especially because your 20s is a very stressful time in your life for a lot of people. Like, my early 20s was definitely a very stressful time in my life. So I went to college, and I chose a college where I made sure that I was not going to know a single person at that school on purpose, because I grew up in the same town my entire life. I wanted to force myself to meet new people, and I knew the only way that that was going to happen was if I chose a college where I literally knew no one. But then COVID hit my freshman year of college, so then I was sent back home for a semester, and then when I got back the next semester, the classes were set up in a hybrid fashion, so some were fully online, some were half in person, half online, and some were fully in person. But that led me to being in my dorm room so much of the time, which was a very isolating experience, especially because I did not have a roommate. So I was just constantly in my dorm room by myself. And I like having my alone time, but that was a bit too much alone time, in my opinion. And it was extremely difficult because I only got like one normal semester of college. So I didn't get to make that many friends at that point. And I was also just extremely stressed out with the situation. So I wasn't in the best like mental state because I was so extremely stressed out with what was going on, as just about everybody else was. But after that, then I got a full-time job and got to move back home. And so I was going to school full-time and I worked full-time. I am extremely grateful for that experience, but I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat the fact that it was so stressful. Like, it was so obnoxiously stressful. And to top it all off, I was in a relationship with somebody who was in the military. And if you've ever been in a relationship with somebody who's in the military, that can also be an extremely stressful situation. I'm not going to sugarcoat that in nostalgia. Like, that was extremely stressful. Am I extremely glad that I went through those situations? Absolutely, because I got to start my career early. I also got to save up so much money, and I got to pay off my debt, like, from my student loans. And even though that relationship was extremely stressful, it taught me so much about myself. It taught me so much about what I want out of a future relationship. Like, and I've had a full year to reflect on all of that because that relationship ended about a year ago. I graduated college like a year and a half ago. Like, I've had a lot of time to reflect and, focus on myself more in the last year. And I'd have to say, like, the last year of my life has probably been the best year of my life. Largely because, I've taken so much time in, like, my early 20s to set myself up in a good position right now. Like, I have a good career and I work for a good company. I'm living on my own, which is something that I dreamed of for years. And I'm so grateful that I get to, like, rent my own home. And I've worked on myself a lot, especially over the last year, in the fact that, like, I've tried to work on my mental health. I've tried to really enjoy my time and be more present in every moment that I experience. And it's just been so nice. Like, I am, like, so extremely grateful for the point that I'm at in my life. But that's not the case for everybody. Like, everybody's at a different point in their 20s. Everybody's experiencing totally different things. And I have no idea what the future's going to bring. Like, frankly, I hope that this is not the best years of my life. I hope that this is not the peak of my life because we don't know how much time that we have on this earth, but I would hope that things continue to get better. And I almost look at life as hoping that I get to enjoy each stage of life for what it is, rather than hoping that, like, one point of my life is going to be the best years of my life. Because life has highs and it has lows. And so to even say that a certain point of my life is going to be the best time of my life, I don't know if I ever really want to have that. Like, I think I just want to be able to enjoy life for what it is at every moment. But it took a lot of work to get to this mindset, okay? Because I remember in my early 20s, like, I was fully convinced that I had to have my life figured out, like, by that point. It was a problem that I didn't have my life figured out yet. And I feel like a lot of people do feel that way. A lot of people sort of have this ideal that, like, by 30, you need to have everything figured out. Like, I know some people who feel as if that by 30, if they are not married and they do not own a home and they do not have a successful career, their life is over, that they've failed miserably at life. And that does not have to be the case, okay? Like, one of the main things I really like about Gary Vee, who is an entrepreneur, author, speaker, and influencer, is that he constantly talks about how you gotta stop acting like your life is over when your 20s are over. And he basically argues that your 20s should be the time where you take the most risks because your most valuable asset is time. And you have time to make mistakes and fix them. And he didn't even start his company until he was 34 years old. He didn't even start his company in his 20s. And also, Rainn Wilson on the Rich Roll podcast talks about how your 20s are a waste of time, in his opinion. He says that it's the time of your life where you need to try 12 different things and fail at 9 of them. And again, I think this just goes back to what I said earlier about how trying to argue that your 20s are going to be the best years of your life puts so much pressure on young people to have everything figured out at such a young age. Like, you don't have to accomplish everything in your 20s. You don't have to have everything figured out in your 20s. You don't know what your life is going to look like, and you don't know what your future self is going to want. The 18-year-old version of me did not want the same things that this 24-year-old version of me wants out of life. My wants now are vastly different than what my 18-year-old self wanted for me by the time I'm 30. Like, just to put it in perspective, 18-year-old me didn't want to live in my hometown at all. Never wanted to come back to my hometown. 18-year-old me wanted to live in a big city and work like a really big media job, whether it was in like the digital space or in, well, it was pretty much the digital space. Like, I really loved creating videos, and I had this goal that I was going to like work at BuzzFeed. That wasn't necessarily my like strict goal, but in my head, I wanted to work for a media company like that, where I got to make videos that were for the digital space, such as on YouTube. I also thought that I was not going to get married. I wasn't even sure if I liked the idea of getting married at that point in my life. And largely that was due to the fact that I had this idea that, well, you can get divorced, so why even get married? I don't believe that anymore. I would really like to get married now. But like 24-year-old me now, I'm not even necessarily trying to focus on planning out my whole life. I'm trying to more so focus on setting myself up for a good future with the understanding that I don't know what's going to happen in the future, and I don't know what I'm going to want in the future. So I'm trying to more so focus on what I can do now to make my life better now that will also set me up for a successful future. Hence why I'm trying to better myself, better my mental health, trying to figure out a better routine for myself day to day. I'm also really focusing on my career right now as well, and trying to really build my skill set and hopefully advance in my career. And, I'm open to a relationship. If I find somebody that I want to date, that's great. I'm not necessarily like desperate to find love at this point. Like I said, some people around my age feel like they've failed if they're not married by 30. I do not have that opinion at all. Like, I will get married whenever it feels right. If that's at 27, great. If that's at 47, that's great too. I'm not trying to set these unrealistic expectations for my life because I feel like everything needs done before I'm 30. So in conclusion, the main point in saying all of this is just to remind people that they don't need to romanticize their 20s to the point where you feel as though you have to reach some sort of unrealistic expectation that was placed on you because you've heard people say that your 20s should be the best years of your life so many times. Your 20s do not have to be the best years of your life. You do not have to force your 20s to be the best years of your life. If anything, as I basically have alluded to this entire time, why would you not want to just enjoy your whole life for what it is at every moment of your life? We have highs in life, we have lows in life. We go through very difficult things at different points in our lives. We all live very different lives. We all have very different circumstances. Why force ourselves to all subscribe to this cookie cutter ideal of our 20s? Why put so much pressure on ourselves to live a certain way at a certain point in our lives? I've felt throughout my life, like at this point in my life, me putting less pressure on myself to live a certain way at a certain point in my life has allowed myself to truly understand what it is that I want out of life, and has allowed me to actually fully enjoy this period of my life more than I have ever been able to. I found that the more pressure that I put on myself, the less I get to actually enjoy the present moment. And isn't that the whole point of life? Because again, we don't know how much time we're going to have on this earth. We don't know how our life is going to play out. So, if you take anything away from this episode, if you're in your 20s, just remember that these do not have to necessarily be the best years of your life. You can just enjoy your life at every moment of your life for what it is. And of course, at the end of the day, whatever the case may be, it's fine.